Hello, welcome to Present History, and thank you for clicking on this video. If you wouldn't mind leaving us a like, maybe subscribing if you're feeling generous, it really does help us make more content just like this. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the video. The summer of 1966 did not feel, in its opening weeks, like the beginning of a legend. England's warm-up performances had been so uninspiring that the press had largely written off their chances before a ball was kicked in earnest. Alf Ramsey, the manager who had promised the nation, with either breathtaking confidence or reckless hubris, that England would win the World Cup, was working with a squad many felt was too limited, too workmanlike, too English in its stolid refusal to dazzle. What unfolded over the following weeks was not a fairy tale. It was something stranger and more interesting than that. A triumph of method, psychology, and stubbornness over glamour, expectation, and chaos. Ramsey himself was a fascinating figure to place at the centre of this story. A former right-back who had played for England with distinction, he had managed Ipswich Town from the 3rd Division to the 1st Division Championship in 1962, doing so without a single player of obvious international class. This was his signature. He did not require brilliance, he required organisation. He took charge of the national team in 1963 and immediately set about dismantling the selection committee system, the practice by which a group of Football Association Blazers chose the team, replacing it with the radical notion that the manager should pick his own players. Ramsey believed that football was a craft to be managed, not a spectacle to be assembled. The FA, to their lasting credit, gave him the authority to prove it. His preparations for 1966 were meticulous to a degree that bordered on the obsessive. He knew the tournament was coming to England years in advance and used every intervening international fixture as an experiment. He watched, assessed, discarded, and revised. His decision to abandon the traditional winger system, the orthodoxy of English football for decades, and play with a flat back four and industrious midfield runners, was widely derided. Jimmy Greaves, the most naturally gifted goal-scorer in English football at the time, found himself squeezed to the margins of a system that had no room for his particular genius. This was a remarkable, almost cold-blooded act of tactical conviction. Greaves's omission from the final squad once he was injured during the group stages remains one of the most debated decisions in English sporting history. Ramsey saw it differently. Geoff Hurst, who replaced him, fit the system. And the system was everything. What is less well remembered is the degree to which the squad's unity was manufactured, carefully and deliberately, over years of shared experience. Ramsey took his players on foreign tours, kept them together for extended periods, insisted on a collective identity that cut across club loyalties. The players from West Ham, Bobby Moore, Geoff Hurst, and Martin Peters formed a core of players already playing a version of Ramsey's tactical system under Ron Greenwood at club level. Moore, in particular, was not simply a great player. He was the physical embodiment of Ramsey's philosophy. Composed, intelligent, reading the game rather than reacting to it, Moore was the kind of captain who did not roar from the front, but organised from within. When Ramsey was once asked what he would do when Moore retired, he reportedly said, simply, that he did not want to think about it. The tournament itself opened improbably. England's first match against Uruguay at Wembley on the 11th of July ended in a goalless draw so tedious that it prompted genuine public embarrassment. The crowd booed, the press muttered. Then England beat Mexico 2-0 and France 2-0, and the tone shifted. By the time they faced Argentina in the quarter-final, something else had entered the picture. Controversy of a deeply unpleasant kind. The Argentine captain Antonio Ratin refused to leave the field after being sent off by the West German referee Rudolf Kreitlein, standing in the center circle in magnificent, theatrical defiance for nearly 10 minutes, while the two footballing nations stared at each other across a cultural and temperamental chasm. Ramsey was furious, not at the referee's decision, but at what he saw as deliberate provocation. He prevented his players from swapping shirts with the Argentines after the final whistle, and, in a comment that was diplomatically unfortunate but personally characteristic, referred to the Argentine players as animals. The remark followed him for years. He was not wrong about the conduct, but he was unwise about the words. The semi-final against Portugal brought one of the moments of the whole tournament. Eusebio, the Mozambican-born striker playing for Portugal, was arguably the most exciting player in the competition and had scored 9 goals before the semi-final. England's response was to deploy Nobby Stiles, a small, gap-toothed Manchester United midfielder who looked, someone once said, as though he had been assembled from spare parts and then asked to do the impossible. Stiles marked Eusebio out of the game. Not brutally, not cynically, but with total and relentless focus. Eusebio scored once from the penalty spot when the match was already decided. Bobby Charlton, by contrast, played perhaps the finest football of his career, scoring twice in a 2-1 victory. England were in the final. Ramsey's team talk before the final against West Germany on July 30th is the subject of competing memories. What most players who have spoken about it recall is not fire and brimstone, but calm. He told them they were the best team in the world. He said it as though it were a statement of observable fact. Whether he believed it entirely is impossible to know. What it produced was a group of players who walked onto the Wembley pitch not with the hunted look of men carrying national expectation, but with something approaching professional certainty. The final itself was not a composed, inevitable English triumph. It was chaotic, disputed, and dramatic. Germany equalised in the final minute of normal time, Helmut Haller having put them ahead early before Geoff Hurst levelled and Martin Peters fired England ahead to take the match to extra time. Then came the moment that has never been fully resolved. Hurst's shot struck the crossbar, bounced down, and was awarded as a goal by the referee Gottfried Dienst after consultation with his Soviet linesman Tofik Bahramov. Whether the ball crossed the line remains, to this day, a matter of dispute. Studies using modern analytical tools have suggested it did not cross fully. The West Germans, then and since, have maintained they were robbed. The English, then and since, have maintained the laws of probability favour them. Either way, England scored again, winning the match by 4-2. They had conquered the world. England had won the World Cup for the first time in their history. It was a defining moment that has never been repeated since. But, in characteristic Ramseyan style, he was not euphoric. He shook hands, said measured words, and appeared to regard the victory as the correct outcome of a process rather than a miracle that had arrived from the sky. Roger Hunt, one of the forwards, recalled that Ramsey simply thanked them for doing what he had asked. No crescendo, no weeping. This restraint was either deeply English or deeply Ramsey. The players, by contrast, had the rather more human reaction of realizing that the noise outside had not stopped, and that they had, somehow, won the World Cup. Bobby Moore, lifting the Jules Rimet trophy from the Queen while wearing immaculate white gloves, wiping his hands, he later explained, because he did not want to soil her gloves, became one of the defining images of the decade. Moore was 25 years old. He had been diagnosed with testicular cancer earlier in the year, had undergone treatment, and had kept the information entirely private during the tournament. This detail, which only emerged later, reframes the image slightly. The composure was real, but it was composure built on something more than natural temperament. The aftermath belonged partly to Jimmy Greaves, who was not there. He had played in the group stage, been injured, and Hurst had taken his place so effectively that Greaves did not return to the side even when fit. He received a winner's medal only in 2009, 43 years after the event, after a campaign by fellow players and supporters. Greaves was gracious about it in public and sardonic about it in private, which is perhaps the only honest combination of responses available to a man in that position. His career effectively diminished after 1966, not because his talent had gone — he continued to score at a remarkable rate — but because something in his relationship with the England setup had quietly ended. The victory reshaped English football's self-perception in ways that were not entirely healthy. They knew they could win. They had the history and the legacy now. England would forever be world champions. But it was exactly that expectation that has weighed heavily on every team since. The public expectation of England teams post-66 has been astronomical and largely unmet. Ramsey himself was sacked in 1974 after England failed to qualify for the World Cup in West Germany. The FA did it in the way that institutions often deal with their greatest servants: swiftly, without particular ceremony, and with a small financial settlement. He was knighted in 1967. He died in 1999. His captain, Bobby Moore, was not there to see it, having died of bowel cancer in 1993 at the age of 51. What the story of 1966 offers, underneath the familiar images, is a case study in what it actually takes to win something difficult. Not inspiration, exactly, and not luck, though both were present. What Ramsey built was a team that had been taught to believe that organisation was not the enemy of excellence, but its precondition. He was right, at least once in the summer of one particular year, on a warm Saturday afternoon at Wembley, when the ball may or may not have crossed the line, and England won the World Cup anyway.